All right, hello again to anyone watching these Kaijudo videos. Today, joining me once again is Andros. How are you doing?
Doing great.
Good to hear. We will be going over, I guess, just a wrap up of the tournament that we just finished off. We're probably going to talk about the standings, how each deck performed, go a little bit into the matchups, and maybe reassess the some of the decks, and we'll cap it off by going a little bit more in depth with your own Light Water Fire Oath Dragons build. But I guess first things first, so we should give you a congrats on the win. Well deserved, in my opinion.
If I completely agree, but I mean it's better to win than to not win. So I'm pretty excited about it. I mean the deck is good, even if maybe the play wasn't perfect, but uh it's fine. I'm looking forward to playing some more games.
For sure. I did call it. If anyone wants to go back to the previous discussion, you were my pick. So if we were betting, I would definitely be taking away some money on this. Perhaps why I threw the finals for anyone who watched those matches.
Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, you had that big side bet you had to go in on. I
Exactly,
see. I see. That
exactly.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't have to go too much into that. But yeah, so to cap it off, yourself, you went 3-0 with Light Waterfire Oath Dragons. I went 2-1 with Cyberlords, finishing, I guess, second with the tiebreakers. And Louis and Dark Signer rounded out the other 2-1 decks with Water Dark Firelight and or Dragons and Water Light Enforcers, respectively. And then at the lower end of the brackets, we have Two Shots finishing 1-2, Raijinku finishing 1-2, and White Ranger also finishing 1-2 with Mono Dark, Light Water Dark Kalima, and Fire Dark Nature Light Skyforce champions, respectively. And then it should be noted as well that unfortunately Karik had to drop from the event at the beginning due to some personal reasons, so he couldn't actually play. He was the Blurple pilot that would have been your first round opponent, so unfortunately he wasn't able to participate, so he became a bye round. But that is the final standings. Um, some of the interesting patterns between this is the second tournament that both you and I have played in, as well as a lot of the other participants. Both of them were 8 man events. The last one I covered as well, and there were some interesting things about this tournament and the previous one. I think piercing judgments is definitely the story. I think I think you'd have to agree with that.
Yeah. It's been good.
For sure. So if you look at the results, I mean, the top four decks: light, water, fire, water, light, water, dark, fire, light, water, light. All four of the positive record decks all played piercing judgment, and there were no piercing judgments in the bottom four decks. And this is actually the same thing that happened in the previous event. So, of like the 16 decks that were played in the last two events, 8 of them were piercing judgment decks, and all 8 of the positive record decks were piercing judgment decks, which is kind of a crazy stat. And going into it further, I think if you look at all the records of all of the piercing judgments in those past or piercing judgment decks in those past two events, they've only lost to each other. So I think like when you look at myself and Louis and Darksigner, all of our losses this event. I mean, Louis lost to yourself, Darksigner lost to me, I lost to you. In the previous event, it was the same thing. I think overall these piercing judgment decks, I think they're 12-0 against all of the non-piercing playing decks, which is again kind of a kind of crazy stat and shows a little bit of separation between the decks that are showing up to these events from what it looks like to me.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Lightwater X is historically one of the strongest
Hmm.
colors in Kaijudo history, even in constructed play for pretty much every era. Um, and maybe some of that is rubbing off that the players who have kind of leaned into a little bit of that more have had better results.
Hmm.
It might be I'm not entirely sold that that is the only way to play, that is
Yeah,
the best way to play or anything,
definitely not.
but it's definitely very strong. I mean, my goodness, people would probably still play piercing if it were 5 mana,
Yeah,
just to be fair.
yeah. I think one of the things going on there is, I mean, these water light decks, they are. I think they're definitely just like really strong in general, of course, right? A lot of them are just kind of at the baseline, they're like these kind of 50-ish decks where, I mean, Light Water Fire Dragons, it has really rounded matchups. A lot of these aggro water light decks have pretty rounded matchups, which is one of the big things going for them. And yeah, that just makes them like good picks for tournaments. And on top of that, I mean, like you mentioned, they're maybe not the best things all told. I mean, there's lots of other strategies. These aren't the most diverse tournament meta games, to be honest, right? Like
It's a big part of it,
I
sure.
think we've seen I think one Haven deck in the last two tournaments, zero Haven plus Andromeda decks, which is kind of crazy. So we're missing a lot of I think a lot of the players just aren't represented overall, which is part of the reason for this. Like the players, if you think about like a lot of like the top tier strategies that you could come up with off the top of your head when you're talking about the open format, it seems like the Water Light X and Light Water Fire Dragons, or even Water Dark Firelight Dragons, it feels like those are sort of the only ones that have really been represented in these events. And it makes sense that they would do well as the only kind of top tier decks that have been represented. So again, I think there's a little bit of separation between I think the decks that have been doing well and the decks that haven't. And I mean, yeah, I think that's just definitely been shown the past few events. I mean, it is also kind of a funny stat that I think in this event, all of the players that finished 1, 2, or worse, I think they only got their wins through a bye. I don't think any of them actually won a match because they never actually played against each other. They all were sort of double KO'd by the water light decks, which is I don't know, kind of a little bit funny in my opinion, but
We should have had a fourth round just so the two mono dark decks could go head to head and see which one was supreme, you know.
fair. I might take the.
Uh,
Ooh, yeah, I think Raijinku might have the edge there with none of his opponents having the Underworld Stalkers, which it might be one of the critical mono dark
oh
mirror
yeah, that
cards.
that kind of ruins the mirror for sure.
But yeah, those are definitely some interesting patterns. Again, I think we're missing a lot of the metagame. It's a really niche sort of like there's not that much diversity in terms of decks. A lot of it like this one was just basically like dark mid range and then water light and dragons. There we're missing a lot of key players. But from what we've seen the last couple events, I think there's no denying that within our own little metagame, I think the winner's metagame is these Waterlight X and Dragon decks. So maybe looking to combat those a little more and tuning a little more to fight those decks going forward would be a good idea. But still,
Sure, for sure.
yeah. So I guess we can move on from the standings and go a little bit more just revisiting briefly each deck that was played. So I think we can start with White Ranger's list. So again, he played Fire Dark Nature, Fire Dark Nature Light. I guess Skyforce champions. He only actually, unfortunately for him, he only got to play one round. Round one, he played against me, which was a match featured on the channel. It was actually a very close match. I mean, he could have easily beat me that match. Um, and then from there, he had to concede his second round to two shots due to some stuff coming up. Real life kind of gets in the way of some of these tournaments sometimes, and then he got the bye in round three against Kairik. So unfortunately, like finished 1-2, but only got to play one match. And again, it was a close one. So I mean, we could have easily seen him take the match against me, and then from there, I wouldn't have loved his chances against the darkness decks, but maybe he could have put up a fight, or not the darkness, the dragons decks, but maybe he could have put up a fight against Dark Signer. But overall, I mean, do you have anything to say revisiting this deck?
Honestly, his deck performed in the game against you. I thought it did better than I would have thought.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely. I know you said you play tested it and you thought it was actually a bad matchup for you.
Yeah, I mean, not
I
terrible,
wouldn't have
but
believed that until you said that, to be honest. But yeah, definitely there's some potential there. I think maybe cleaning up a few card choices
mm-hmm.
and streamlining a little bit. I think that strategy has some merit. You know, the kind of the mid range ramp style
Yeah.
uh, with all the control tools and everything.
I mean,
So
my biggest issue with this deck is that I mean, it's built around a core of a lot of just like generally strong cards, right? Like all of the Shield
mhm.
Blast removals, the Sprouts, the even Bronze Arm Tribe's not like a terrible card, right? Even though it's kind of fallen by the wayside in a lot of ways. I really like Joko as a card. Full Metal Lemon's great, right? Major Ow is a tested card. Spire Puppet. It's just the cards that make this deck what it is. I think are the cards that aren't really are cards that I would probably drop from it going forward if I really wanted to improve it. And that's kind of like the Strategist plus Toranok. I mean, Strategist is a reasonable card for sure, especially when you have like the major owl synergies. It just I don't really think that comes together too much. And Toranok, I think you and I would both agree that the card's just not really very strong.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, there are better Force champion options available.
hmm
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I like Volaron as a card. It makes sense as a pick, especially when you're trying to string together like a four color mana base. Whether it's better than just like playing something like Infernus. Again, when you're going Skyforce champion routes, I can definitely see why you would go with Volaron, but I think just maybe like a more streamlined, just generally good stuff, Fire, Dark, Nature, Light control that's built around a lot of the same kind of core strong cards that this one is would be a more improved version. But I mean, when you want to show up with some nifty synergies and when you want to try to pop off with Toranok, I guess it makes sense to go that route. But I think when you go that way, I think it's no surprise that you might have a little more difficulty in a tournament setting.
Sure, sure, yeah.
But again, he
I mean,
played a close match with me, so
yeah, yeah, definitely.
um, and that one mesmerize came up super clutch. So it would have been maybe a little bit nice to see more of those. Um,
Yeah, well, hey, that's a trend I think a lot of our darkness players would benefit from.
for sure.
Not gonna lie.
Yeah, more mes is generally a good thing, I think.
Yeah,
With that, going on to Raijinku's list, revisiting his. So I think his experience, round one, featured on the channel. He took a loss to Louis. Again, I think the big thing there was just not being set up for dragons, really, with his deck list and a lot of the card choices. Again, like we just alluded to, not having Mesmerize was a very big deal for that matchup. Just being kind of hyper focused on a lot of just like small creatures and these kind of clunky vortexes didn't really pan out. And I think it really showed the lack of tools that we kind of speculated would be the case going into those matches. And it kind of turned out to be an accurate speculation.
yeah, it's tricky. I think if you're not playing the rush or tempo plan, I think you gotta respect the threat of dragons. Like if nobody was playing it, it'd be one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we've had one or more dragon decks both of these last couple events, and I know maybe that changes going forward. Maybe we don't ban them, but we kind of soft. Yeah, we'll play something else. But
Mm-hmm.
it's that kind of game plan plays into it real pretty bad. And with outside of drawing those specific evos, you're kind of it's gonna wreck you.
Yeah, I mean, we saw. I forget if I think it was both games. Louis just landed a pretty juicy Herald, and then so it definitely showed. I think his second round, he unfortunately got the bye against Karik, and then uh, round three, I believe he took a loss to Darksigner as well. And that was just another match where I think the way it played out, I mean, Darksigner just kind of played a little bit passively, just used the super strong card draw cards like Cephalia and Finbar, and just, again, kept, I think, was playing pretty intelligently, not going in too much on Raijinku's shields, and then it left him in a spot where, I mean, his deck just doesn't really do too much with its mana. Like, it's just, again, deploying small creatures that aren't really that relevant, and then maybe just sitting on an evolution creature trying to get a tempo swing. But if your opponent doesn't really play into your hands, it's kind of hard to get value out of your cards. And then you're just kind of sitting there without much to convert into in the late game, um, without stuff like Andromeda, which I was surprised to see him drop from the list because I know he plays that card in a lot of his light dark lists. But yeah, dropping that was probably a little bit detrimental for a lot of these matchups. Um, Yeah, I think one of the big exclusions as well that both of us, I mean, we've kept forgetting to talk about it over and over was
Yes.
Vang from Eye of the Storm, which I think was one of like the premier, definitely one of the premier cards coming out of Eye, and something.
Probably, yeah, easily top 3 for sure.
Yeah, just a standalone, really
No
powerful
question.
card.
Yeah.
Gives you a powerful creature against a lot of these kind of like aggressive decks. Something that pairs really well with that kind of interactive game plan. Definitely, maybe it's I guess it's not as suited if you're trying to go in on this evil plan with more cheap creatures and stuff. But I think that just a more standalone threat. I mean, Vang was just a card I would have expected to see people bring, knowing that it was with I, maybe wanting to try out some of the newer cards. So kind of surprised not to see it here, but I guess it kind of makes sense with some of the direction that Raijinku tried to go with his list. But
Yeah. I still think it's probably worth sneaking a copy or two in, but I
mhm.
mean, that's probably not the first card I would put in. Honestly, the getting the mezzes in would probably be a little higher on my priority list.
Yeah,
But
probably Bone Blades. I think would be a nice card to see as well. I mean,
yeah, definitely.
I
But
think it just didn't really pan out for him when he decided to add the third color. Um, I would just favor a lot of the light dark builds that he plays. I would have favored that a little bit more. I think he did mention that he was trying something a little different this time around, and I think he would probably agree that it just didn't really work out, and maybe going with more of the traditional builds that he had piloted in the past would have been a little bit better for this event.
yeah, probably.
But
Yeah, and if you wanted to go a little more into, like you said, the kind of the aggro-y mid-range creature heavy build, then leaning into that harder might have been the other way to go with it, you know. Uh, go all in on the Chimera package or whatever and leave off some of the high-end stuff and try to win with that setup. But kind
mm-hmm,
of towing both lines. It makes for a fine casual deck, but not great in this kind of environment for sure.
I think yeah, not too much more to say about it, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it would have been interesting to see how it fared against some of the other decks, but yeah, just kind of got a little bit wrecked by the water light decks that it played against. So I guess moving on now, we can go to Two Shots list. So for Two Shots, he also finished 1-2, but again, round one lost to I believe Dark Signer, and then round two got a concession from White Ranger who couldn't play the match, and then round three got a loss to Louis. I didn't see those matches, I don't believe, but yeah, I mean, similar issues with. I mean, he's got the Bone Blades and Mesmerizes to help deal with dragons, but I think the issue here is. I mean, I think the overall card quality, again, when you're going with all these scare adorable things, is probably a little bit lower than you would like. I mean, he's got a lot of.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, he's got a lot of the same stuff, though, like Medusas, Gigabolvers, Chimeras, but.
yeah, and a lot of its cards are good. There are just a
Mhm,
few kind of weird choices in there. Maybe again, kind of the overall idea of trying to go all the way up the ladder to Kalima as well. I think well, I mean, again, talking about Vang, be perfect here.
mhm.
Going in, slotting in over some of those bigger
Scared adorable cards.
well, the Scaradorbles. Yeah, the Dark Scaradorble. I mean, I kind of don't mind Dark Scaradorble as a card, but I think Vang just outclasses it
Yeah, I think
9 times out of 10.
the big thing here is just like lacking kind of a. I feel like it's just lacking a little bit of a cohesive vision. Like a lot of the card
Yeah,
choices, like it kind of looks like they're leaning aggro, but then mid range and control. And like I guess from one end of the spectrum, it's kind of like you're viewing it as like the Kalimas are maybe just your tools to combat control. You're not really a deck that's trying to get up there and cast them. Maybe you want to be like more of like a mid rangey aggro, not really aggro, but more of like just like a mid rangey creature deck. But but yeah, I think the card quality is a little low for that. But I mean, that's kind of what you get with mono dark, right? Which is something I think we touched on in the previous video. Is just, I mean, you can definitely play a deck like this, and it's all the power to you, right? Like I definitely see just wanting to be the scared horrible guy and just show up and play matches with them. But if you're really trying to take first place in an event like this, I mean, mono dark's only really gonna get you so far.
yeah,
And yeah, I think it was a similar thing with Raijinku where he just played against some of the stronger decks in the field and just couldn't really compete with them. But yeah, I mean, not too much more to say about that than what we mentioned. So now getting into the X1 decks. First up, we have Dark Signer's list. So back-to-back X1 tournament finishes. Last time he lost to me in the finals. This time around, made a couple changes to his list. Again, added a couple more evolutions. Went up on Blinder Beetle Primes. Went up on Sashas. Um, and then went down on maybe a 2-drop and a Shield Blast in favor of that stuff. But I mean, once again, I mean his list performed pretty well. Um, Round one, he defeated Two Shots again. Just again the solid like just core of just anti kind of mid range control card. Just a lot of card advantage. Sephelia just is such a back breaking card. Round round two, he lost to myself, where I think I had the slight edge in the kind of light water mirror match with some of the card choices in my deck, but it could have gone either way. I think, to be honest, looking at that match, I think I just kind of, I mean, I definitely ran well. Game two, he just kind of got blown out by an arbiter because his hand didn't really have a lot of play to it, and then that sort of was a wrap on the match. Not much he could really do there. And then round three, he, I believe, took down Raijinku. Again, I mean, hopefully that match will be up on the channel at some point as well. And I mean, there the Sephelia really. I think you were watching that live, eh? When Dark Center ripped the Sephelia in game two.
Yeah, I remember that. Yes.
Yeah, the
I don't remember much else about the game, but I remember that.
mhm.
That was huge. I thought the game might have been starting to stabilize, favoring Raijinku. I thought, oh, hey, we're going to get to game three here,
Yeah, the
and he
Megalcax came
dropped a
down.
Cephalia, yeah, and it was pretty much over from there.
Mhm. Yeah, so that was kind of gross, but I mean that's how what the deck does, right? It just chains together
Yeah,
Sephelia and Finbar, that package of cards, in stringing it into Sasha's, and then just dropping Blinder Beetle Primes out of your hand. I mean, it's just pretty hard to deal with. So just a generally strong deck, pretty focused. I mean, he didn't get to play against dragons, but I still think
yeah.
I think his deck
Glad
is
I'm glad he didn't.
yeah. I mean, it's hard to say how he would have done. I think he would still might be would probably be an underdog against your Oath Call version. But I mean, against Louis' deck, I think Louis again just missing the Oathsworn and Jump Jets would have been a much better matchup for Darksteiner. I think
Sure.
kind of heralding back to the old metagame. I mean, Dragons was kind of pushed out of the metagame when it got super tempo heavy, or not when it got super tempo heavy, but it kind of got pushed out as it was just kind of the tempo decks got really good at combating dragons, and then Jump Jets was kind of the tech that brought dragons back into the fold because it gave them the ability to kind of fight through that tempo stuff. Because when you are trying to resolve a herald and push it through, I mean, trying to bank on pushing through a 5 mana card is actually not a great strategy against these tempo decks. Like they're really equipped to deal with that stuff. But when you factor in Jump Jets and Oathsworn Call especially, that's when it gets really tricky. So I think his deck was definitely positioned pretty well. I think, but against that kind of winners metagame, I mean, I think he was a slight underdog to me, maybe a slight underdog to you, and then probably a favorite against Louis. But overall, just a really strong deck. Having the Blinder Beetle, I really like as well for combating dragons. Just being able to take out a
Sure.
bird on curve. The Magris was an interesting choice. I think it played out. I mean, it probably wasn't too relevant to be honest. It's kind of a good tempo play in the mid to late game, but whether it's better than Cyberscamp, probably not. I think Cyberscamp just high quality card, but Cyberscamp wasn't too necessary for this event. Looking at the list that did well, but I don't know. I would almost like Cloudwalker Drone. I just like that it's a little bit more robust a body and pairs really well with Blinder Beetle, which I think is pretty relevant for a lot of like the aggro mirrors and against dragons as well. Just having that extra 2-drop that's like got a decent size to it is pretty nice. But I don't know. Not too much more to say, I guess.
It's a pretty good deck.
Yep,
I don't
just
have a whole lot to say about it either.
yeah, just solid. Had another very strong showing. And then we have Louis' deck up next. Water Dark Firelight Dragons. I mean, I think his tournament experience, round one beat Raijinku 2-0. Round two played against you and lost 2-0. And then
Yeah.
round three defeated Two Shots, I believe, and then finished with a 2-1 record. So another a strong showing from him as well. I think probably that key match was. I mean, the other two I would assume like both 2-0 victories over Raijinku in two shots. I mean, we saw the Raijinku match on the channel. There it wasn't very close. I'm sure the two shots match was similar, but the match against you was probably the match for him that was most important in that event. And I mean, there, I guess we kind of saw maybe you could blame it as an issue on the Water Dark Fire Light deck, where game one he kind of just didn't really do much, stumbled a bunch, and kind of fell way too far behind, and you just capitalized and destroyed him. But I don't know. Would you?
Yeah, I mean, it was going to be I mean, that's the nature, as far as I can tell, that's the nature of the Dragon versus Dragon is that it can definitely
Exactly.
end up being a blowout either way. And game one was a blowout in my favor. Game two started out as a blowout in his favor, and I managed to get exactly the shield pass I needed at exactly the time I needed, and I managed to turn the game around.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
game
but
two. Yeah,
yeah, but I mean, we were fairly evenly matched, and yeah, I got the RNG I needed.
hmm. So yeah,
So it worked out pretty good for me. But I mean, I don't know. We play that match 10 more times. I who knows? It'd probably be a lot closer
yeah, it
than it
was
looked.
by no means like a definitive 2-0 like you said. Like game 1 was just you drew well, he drew bad, and then game 2 was he drew well, you didn't, you kind of drew bad. I think you also maybe made some mistakes committing the core isle to the board. Some of your sequencing was a little bit questionable in that second game, but at the same time, then you had the insane shields that kind of pulled you out of it. I don't know how likely. Maybe you put yourself like 10% to win that game from that position, maybe even less. But I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
I don't. I think it's got to be way less than that. I mean,
yeah.
maybe if I would have played it out more optimally, I could have had better odds, realistically. But
Hmm.
yeah, it
So
was
yeah,
rough.
so
It
yeah,
was rough.
kind of hard to say anything too definitive. I think you could easily just look at that first game and blame it on the fact that it's a four color water dark fire light deck. That's the problem with trying to play Umbra. But at the same time, I mean, even regular dragons just bricks off every match. Like one, you're probably due for like one terrible hand a match, right? And
That's
so
yeah, yeah.
I don't think like that's an exclusive issue to going four color. You could argue that four color might make it even more consistent with when you add the Umbras, right? But I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. I think overall, I think Louis had mentioned in the comments that he was considering a lot of card changes, maybe moving towards the second Andromeda over and cutting some of the one-off dragons like Baelgor, um, making a little bit of changes. But I think overall, I like the build. Definitely, I mean, he did well with it in the event, and then the one match he lost was kind of a coin toss, probably. So definitely a lot of merit to going four colors, but we need to see a lot more of
Yeah,
a.
that's one of those things that would be interesting to play test a little bit to see if the advantages that the darkness gives you with having the better removal tools and the extra bird
Mhm.
offsets the deck building cost and probably having to go over 40 cards and all that.
For sure.
I mean, interesting thing to explore a little more. So
For sure, but I mean, like we mentioned before as well, though, I would really like to see some of those jump jets or Osworn call. Like, I mean, Osworn makes sense that you can't really support it in a four color build like this, but at least some jump jets or something along those lines to help address the tempo matchups. And I think that's one of the big reasons to drop darkness is to just make more space for the tech choices that help you with those matchups. Um, so I think that's one of the big things for just dropping the fourth color is like this deck. I think we didn't get to see it, but I think it would struggle a little bit more with some of the light water based decks to where they maybe aren't as favored of matchups as you would want them to be. And you might even be the underdog, especially against my deck. Probably not so much, where the darkness removal is really punishing, but against Dark Designer's deck, it probably would be the case where it's a much worse matchup. And I did play some of that matchup at some point, and I definitely felt like Dark Designer was a favorite, but didn't end up happening in the tournament. Um,
yeah,
So I guess we can go to my list.
I know in the comments of the Discord, he talked about doing some other things with the dragon concept going
Hmm.
forward, trying out some different options. So
Yeah, I
we'll see
definitely.
what he brings up bringing to the next thing.
Hmm. For sure, we'll see. Brought a couple different decks over the last two tournaments. So with my list, I mean, I brought the Waterlight Cyberlords. Uh, Round one, I mean, I had that close match against White Ranger where I narrowly won. Round two, played a match against Dark Signer where, I mean, I felt like I drew really well, um, or things just went my way with that match. And then round three, we played, and a little bit of a crap show, to be honest. Not my best, not my best showing, but yeah, I think overall, I mean, you could make you could maybe make the argument that in that finals match, like I lost a match 2-0 that my deck probably would have won 2-0 if someone better was playing it. So, I mean, that might say that or might kind of give the indication that this deck did have some of the tools or a fair amount of the tools that you would need to combat dragons, even if it's not a great matchup. So, there are some positive things to say about it.
I could see that second game if I had played it a little better, not going as well for you because I think we both messed up the second game. The first game, yeah, you probably should have won that game for
Yeah, I
sure.
mean, if I don't,
Uh,
yeah, if I don't throw away my laws, I think just based on the cards and what they were, I would have won the game if I didn't make a
yeah.
mistake. And then game two, yeah, I think both of us maybe made some errors, but I mean, I was like we touched on in that match video, I was probably like 90% to win it from the final position, and then again, you just kind of the cards went your way, so
Well,
hard to say too much,
yeah,
but
yeah.
so
Yeah. I am the sackiest champion of all sacky champions. It's fine.
no, it's the deck. I mean, that's the strength of dragons. Is it's just like it was similar for me in the last tournament. It's hard to play against, and it's not. I mean, it's not too difficult to play with. You kind of just you have the cards or you don't, and especially at least in these matchups where you don't have to
Yeah.
do too much like game planning as much. It's just kind of draw your heralds and lyras and do your thing. But it is just puts a lot of the decisions on your opponent, and it is just very tricky to play against. And just one thing goes wrong, and the game's completely in your favor. So that's just another one of the strengths of the dragon deck. And yeah, but overall, like I thought my deck was fine. Um, yeah, I don't know. It looked a little bit sketchy in the first round. It was probably better than I wanted to give it credit for. Like even like I said in the last round, it maybe could have had a better showing if I wasn't as bad of a player. But I don't know. I don't have too much confidence in the dragon matchup. Even still, like even if I would have maybe been lucky enough to win that match with tight play, I think I would still be the underdog overall. Like the vast majority of those matchups, I would probably expect to lose. But because I think looking at your draws, I don't think you drew particularly well or those games, but I don't know.
Yeah, the game game one, I don't think I did. I mean, my goodness, I barely stabilized on like after I hit turn nine, so I was able to drop Infernus
Hmm.
and Andromeda. But the game two, I think if I would have played it out better and actually, you know, played the cards I wanted to play at the turns I wanted to play them instead of not, uh, I think that might have gone a little closer. It might have still ultimately favored you, honestly. I'm not
Hmm.
100% sure. It's
Yeah.
one of those things we'd have to go back and like rebuild the deck and rebuild the scenario in order to know
Hmm.
which with optimal play if it would have changed the outcome. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Like I think.
that's gonna happen. We're all doing this for funsies. We're
Hmm.
not professional card game players.
Yeah. I think the Evo plan to try to combat dragons was fine. I mean, like the dendrites almost got there the second game, right? Like the neuron was kind of important. I mean, neither game I really saw like the on curve neuron, I don't think, which is one of the big deals. I mean, the second game I saw like the turn three Cetus, which is really important, but the issue is like this plan is not really that difficult to combat. Like I think if you just throw in like some PPRs, like my Cetus just doesn't really do anything anymore because it's already kind of sketchy. It just gets completely slowed down by Lyra. And yeah, if you just throw in a couple Psychic Predators, like most of my evil plan is just kind of out the window. So I think there's a lot of room for dragons
Yeah.
to get better, whereas this deck is.
Actually, that's something I thought Dark Signer's list might be able to be improved by was adding the Cetus to it. Um,
I don't
maybe
know.
one or two copies.
I'm not the biggest fan of Cetus overall. Like I think it's in a very narrow meta game. I think it really has a place, but it's just a bit of it's a kind of sketchy card. Like I
Hmm.
just like I
I
think
thought it was difficult to deal with as a dragon player. Let me put it that way.
yeah,
But
in certain it has to line up really well though. Like I have to have that hand that turn 3 Cetus is or has like a turn 4 Cetus, and then turn 4 Cetus can be pretty slow, and then
well, let me put it this way. If he kept the Magruses in, I think it might have merit. But if he decided
mhm.
to cut those and go back to scamps or
Yeah,
whatever, then
I mean
it probably doesn't need to be there then, for sure.
I could see it as like a one of, but I think there's so many matchups where it's like not that great. Like against control, it's not
I
doing
just think it
much.
has a lot of synergy with the whole core isle plan as well, of being able to have a high odds of setting yourself up with a
Yeah.
couple of shields, which it makes it for the player, the more controlly player, it makes gives them a really hard time to try
Hmm.
to fight back, even if they do manage to take control of the board. Because with the Evos having access to, you know, to being able to win the game out of nowhere, and the
Yep.
card draw to get back into the game, it
It's
just puts you on a very tricky position to ever have a chance against that kind of a deck.
yeah. It's definitely like it's a good card. I think just a vortex evolution like it's just super clunky a lot of the time. Like
Oh, well,
it
sure,
has to
sure.
show up at the right time.
It's far from.
It's like really good in specific like the light water mirror. It was really exceptional. If you're playing against rush decks, it's really exceptional. But it's even just kind of mediocre, even against like mid rangey Evo aggro decks. It gets starts getting sketchy. It's really sketchy against control. It's okay against dragons, but like I said, like they can just configure to be better against it. And then there's a lot of draws where it's just it makes it really hard to kind of compound your pressure. Like that was the issue for me in that second game was like I go in on Cetus, but you're kind of on this plan where like you're just going Cetus, and it makes it really difficult for you to like kind of compound and like double down and actually start generating more pressure, right? Because just being a vortex that you devote all your tempo and your cards to it, it's just it's hard to kind of actually play like a proper beatdown game, and I just think it's a little too ambitious even in the dragon matchup. Like it can get there sometimes, but I found like games like that second one I played against you, I think are actually like the pretty small minority. Like you never like
Hmm,
if you just
fair
find a
enough.
Lyra, I think it's just yeah, it's just not that
Well, I think I even did in that game.
at some point, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, anyway,
I mean the Lyra I think came down before. I don't know. Yeah, we don't have to go too much in depth on that, but
yeah.
even the Lyra did slow me down. But or no, we might be thinking about game one. I have no idea. Whatever. Okay, so
I
yeah,
I'm
definitely
not
game.
sure.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move off that. So finally, we can get to your deck in the get to your deck last. So light water fire oath dragons again, just pretty, just a really solid deck. Very well positioned, I think, for these kind of meta games where I mean a lot of the winning decks in the last couple events they were a lot of I think it was like three different light water X decks, some dragon decks, right? Like it's just a lot of stuff that this list is pretty well positioned against. And then, yeah, decent enough against a lot of the mid range decks that people are bringing. So,
Yeah, I think it's a very strong deck, and it's hard to. I mean, at least against the metagame that we've got going on right here, which I guess to be clear is talking about the people playing on these tournaments. It's not talking about
mm-hmm. the
the
overall.
larger hypothetical, if you had 1,000 players playing Kaijudo, what would everybody be playing? And you were, trying to actually win real things,
Hmm.
uh, there would be a very different metagame, I'm sure, than what the 10 or so players on the dojo are bringing to events.
Yeah,
Um,
big,
but
big time agree.
and that's kind of where I'm at with it. I think that the list was pretty good. I probably would change a few things. I don't know if you got it pulled up. I can't see your screen.
Yeah, I've
Uh,
got the
I,
sideboard that you had.
okay, yeah. So I kind of wanted to just like talk through some of the card choices that I think I made were poor because most of it is fine. I mean, most
Hmm.
of it's super standard. So, it's not really much discussion. It's like, I think I'm only going to play one Herald instead of three. No, no. Um, but a couple things I think I would do differently going forward. First off, Arbiter was fine.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure Storm Spark is just straight up better though.
Yeah,
Uh,
I, I would probably agree. Like there were a lot of times, like in those, like if you're facing down Evos like Neuron and Cetus, like Arbiter's just not. I mean, neither card is really doing anything, but Stormspark has the ability to like just be that card that stops everything and
Yeah,
actually
it's
cheaper
a better card
removal.
to play off a core out most of the time. It is it is a guaranteed stop and I don't die
Hmm.
unless you specifically tech around Storm Spark Blast, but nobody does. Uh it actually allows me to kill stuff like Keeper of Laws, which otherwise I don't really have a way to deal with the build.
Yeah.
Um and it curves better with Herald anyway. Like you can
Hmm.
go Herald on 5, Stormspark on 6, which yeah, you've got a million other ways to do that in the deck, but Arbiter doesn't. So I mean, Arbiter was really cool in a few specific situations against like really, really aggro-y side of stuff, which admittedly was at least one of my matchups. But I just think Storm Spark's probably better against the field,
Yeah.
probably at having to deal with like other dragon decks that like the Infernus that have Infernus that specifically don't allow Arbiter to be played.
Hmm.
It just is a better overall card. Like Arbiter is still really good.
Yeah.
And like honestly, if I had somehow if I'd ever decided to cut the oaths, um I could see even running both potentially. But
Yeah.
with
It's
with the
definitely good.
constraint of having oaths in there, I would have Storm Spark over Arbiter. So
Yeah, if you were worried about like a lot of weenie aggro decks, then I think Arbiter makes a lot of sense. Um, like it would be specifically good like as a hedge if you're expecting a bunch of rush. It makes sense to add when you're expecting some cyber scamp decks as well, which I'm sure you were. But kind of like I was touching on, like it's not super great when like again, it's not like Stormspark answers it any better. But like when I am playing like neurons or things like that, the Arbiter you'd probably just rather have Stormspark in your deck because it's not like Arbiter's blowing out those matchups too often. And then
yeah,
against
I mean
Darksteiner's
it
deck, it's
can,
probably a bit better, but
but yeah,
yeah,
but it's uh
definitely a solid card. Like it's not like there's a huge gap between them, but I do prefer. I think Stormspark just adds like a dimension that's a little more necessary to have in there.
um I guess the next thing is I don't think triple Finbar is necessary.
Yeah,
Um
this is something I think we talked
yeah,
about.
you're a little harder on it than I am, admittedly, but I'm definitely a kind of the mindset that probably two Finbar at the moment is probably fine. I know you're kind of down to, hey, let's just play run one,
I
but
don't know exactly
uh
where I would land, but I think the idea is like Finbar is more like it's not part of the core. I think like Finbar is just like another one of the options that you use to tune your deck for matchups, and I think like Finbar is like especially strong and probably necessary if we were playing in a field with a ton of these like Haven, Ramp, Andromeda control decks, and that's like one of the reasons it
yes.
started making its way into decks was like fighting these like super heavy control decks that were not as heavy on interaction, but a little more just kind of like these greedy, just like greedy bad decks. Like Finbar just destroys those kinds of things. And I think when you're moving away, we haven't seen a single, like I said before, we saw like one Haven deck, no Haven Andromeda decks in the last two events, and you don't need this. like power card as much, and it is kind of just it. You have to just the fact that it is kind of just like a clunky, expensive card, and
Yeah,
like it's
I charged it a lot.
mm,
And it does again, it doesn't play under Infirmus unless I hit it off of an oath.
yeah,
And it doesn't actually help Herald all that much. I mean, I guess you can remove your opponent's dude and then just swing for shields and draw cards, which is cool, but that only works in some scenarios. Sometimes you don't want to be breaking shields, and so you're sitting there like, oh, hey, do I give my opponent cards just so I can draw, or do I just
yeah.
sit here and play a Rusalka that costs 2 extra mana, you know?
I mean, yeah,
Um,
that's the thing. Like against the decks that have been winning, like you don't need Finbar against aggro. Like it's basically a
exactly.
tech for control, and it also helps against mid range where you're doing these like kind of staring contests, right? And then you play your Finbar and go in. But I
Yeah,
think in a lot of those matchups, like especially if the decks aren't built that well, you can get away with it. It doesn't really matter. Like you can play your Finbars, you don't get
sure.
punished
I mean,
for it.
it's not bad,
Yeah,
certainly, but
it's
it
good.
does feel a little clunky. My thought on that was to swap the one thin bar for the logo scan. Um,
Hmm.
I do want the card draw, and on rounds when I don't see Nyx, having a logos early
Yeah,
does
I
help.
think
It's going to help me to see my other combos more.
yeah, especially if people move back towards Mesmerize and Bone Blades and stuff like that. I definitely want Logos in my deck just to hit extra, just to be able to
Yeah,
generate extra resources. Because like the problem again is like this deck is so mana hungry that you just kind of you charge your when you get lower on resources, you're just top decking like 6 to 9 mana cards that you just can't play. So you just sacrifice so much tempo against these mid rangey decks, and then Finbar comes down, and then you don't even really have much of a board presence. It's kind of hard to attack profitably. Like you don't even like sometimes you don't even want to attack and just like draw one card, and then I like we've played some of these matchups too where I play decks with these kind of game plans against dragons, and I'm sure you've experienced it yourself where you have like you just go like Herald into Finbar and hope to get something going, and it just like doesn't work. And
exactly.
and
Yeah.
I think just having like logos just again gives you something to do with your mana on the early turns and just helps. And I mean,
Yes.
we see like Louis and like shows up with dragons and he doesn't have the fin bars, which I think are like a big holdover from like the past kind of Kaijudo thinking, right? I mean, the fin bars again, they're really good, but I think they're not like a core card. Like they're definitely
Yeah.
something that is
I
more of a
still
tuning
really
choice.
like them with
Yeah,
the oaths for sure,
that's
but
part of it.
I do think I running three is ambitious for a format that doesn't have that our meta game that doesn't have a whole lot of the heavy control stuff going on.
Yeah, and like
Um,
yeah, it's like we see again like Louis shows up has triple logo scan because like which I think
yeah,
is pretty nice
there's
for
a
him.
lot of merit to that type of like if I wasn't running oats, I could totally see doing that, honestly.
Hmm.
I'm gonna stick with the oats because I think they're really good. And so because of that, I'm gonna stick with Finbar, at least 2 copies for the time being. But honestly, this is a thing that I could see playtesting between now and whenever we do a thing again and come up to a different conclusion.
Yeah, I mean,
But
but again, it's all meta dependent, and Finbar is an insanely
oh yeah,
strong card.
absolutely. Finbar could definitely come back in if people, but
Um,
I get
yeah,
the read that people are playing Pile again or something, totally.
yeah. It's also interesting to
Um,
note too that even like Darksigner, I've seen like his builds of dragons, and like even he
mhm.
is just like on triple logos. So I mean, maybe that's just like again, like maybe that's just people who haven't played as much Kaijudo, and they're
Yeah,
not like bound to the old thinking. But I
yeah.
don't know.
Well, I mean, again, I think there's a lot of merit to that line of play
Yeah,
for sure.
I was thinking
The
like you
next
could.
change I'd
Oh
probably
yeah.
do would be I'd cut my Strider. Um, it was fine, but I don't think it was as necessary as I thought it was. No, nobody really brought a rush deck, and nobody has brought rush decks. It's been more of the tempo and mid range type stuff. So um, I literally brought that to counter rush, and
Hmm.
I think I might consider like running tree there if I got the feel that we're going to keep having the mono dark parade and they start running a little more discard heavy. But my thought for the moment, if excluding that scenario, would be to run laws second copy.
Yeah, the second
It's
copy of
really
Laws
good.
is really good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I am a little heavier on water at the moment, so I can cut the water card.
yeah. It kind of
Um,
Strider's a fine inclusion for certain things. I don't mind it. It's a solid card. I think sometimes necessary if you have like if you need the water requirement, but for I would
and
rather
again, it's
pick.
something that would definitely make its way back in if
Yeah.
I if like, oh hey, you guys all decide to bring those water nature aggro decks or something, probably put it back in because
Hmm. But yeah,
it does do its job well.
I would probably prefer having Iron Will as like a more dual purpose card. It's just a matter of like the water conversation, I guess, when you're making that choice if you do want a blocker. But yeah, I mean, I even after the last tournament, I built my own, or not even after, during sometime during while the tournament was still going on, I had like built my own version of dragons, trying out some of these choices, and like I had one Iron Will tree, I had I think two Finbar with like two logos, and I think I cut like a Sky Crusher. Like it was very similar to this, but again, trying a lot of these same cards that you highlighted, where I just had Iron Will. I think I cut the Laws to try without it, but I think Laws is
I
probably
wish I
not.
would have seen laws more often. It's where I'm at with it. It's like I think I only saw it once, and I would have liked to have seen it more often than that.
Yeah,
I
it's
guess
good.
the last tweak I would make, and this might be ambitious, honestly. I'm only running the one jump jets. Uh, it definitely came up. It was good. I kind of I'm not sure if I would stick that in against this current meta game. Like it
Um,
does do a very good work against like the Rusalka heavy stuff, and there are a lot of Rusalkas around, but I feel like the Oathsworns do a pretty good job of dealing with that threat as well.
mm,
And I really, really missed not having a big double breaker or fast attacker. I really wanted to get
mm,
that in here, and I ultimately didn't make it. So my thought would be to cut the jump jets and go back to either running like Heretic
mm.
or maybe Hyperspeed as another alternative because
It's
Hyperspeed actually
interesting.
did really well. I was surprised at how well it performed.
Yeah,
So
Hyperspeed's just a
yeah,
solid card. I
and
mean,
maybe that's a bad decision, and maybe I'll go back on it. But because I mean, again, jump jets did do fine, but that's kind of where my version 2.0 of the deck would be where I'd be looking at going
I
forward.
mean, yeah, I think
Um,
you're definitely much higher on Viraka than I am. I'm not the biggest. I'm not really a fan of the card. I mean, I did play it in my open list way back in the day. I had it as one of, and the main reason was just like a water fire mana. But I think when you construct your deck well enough, you don't really need that water fire mana slot filled.
yeah, and
And I
maybe I would
think,
ultimately cut it for like Tooth or the Hyperspeed or something. That's totally
yeah, I mean, I
plausible.
definitely,
Or maybe I even just keep with jump jets. I don't know, but
yeah,
it's
I don't really love
I
like,
like having the reach option.
yeah, I mean,
And
fast attack is definitely nice. Like just having something for that. Um, I just don't like the huge, like just another big thing. I don't know if it's like super necessary, but I mean, it's a sweet card. I think it's definitely not bad. Um,
uh,
Worth considering. I think I like Twin Cat and Maelstrom personally. I know it's not like the best card, but I would
oh,
almost consider like a 1-1 split with it in Sky Crusher. Um, like that's what I've been trying is just like Sky Crusher is nice because it's like this kind of mid-rangey threat that like it's a big double breaker comes down can kill stuff, so it's just like nice in some slower games, but at the same time being 7 mana is just pretty slow. And Twin Cannon
I can
Maelstrom,
see that. I didn't really seriously consider the card, but that actually would solve some of the issues I was having in a few situations, being able to have access to that just a little bit earlier than Sky Crusher.
yeah, because it just comes down early enough. Like
Huh.
if it's just good off an O like or not off an O call, but like a lot of the times like your opponent's beating you down with evolutions, like, and I think Maelstrom's a much better solution to that than Sky Crusher because like your opponent comes in at your shields with loss, they break an oath, you drop a herald, and then you can just easily, you don't need, because like if they're beating you down with a blinder beetle prime, chances are you're probably not going to have birds lying around to make the Sky Crusher cheaper, right? So like just having that super cheap option and getting herald to 7k I mean, it does most of what Sky Crusher does. Like there are some cards like Cetus maybe specifically, but a lot of the evolutions like Neuron and um, uh, Charging Great Claw, which is kind of a relevant one. Like a lot of them, just I think Maelstrom lines up well against. But I mean, I get that Maelstrom's like kind of just like a mediocre card on its own. So, but it is also just like another.
There's yeah, there's merit to thinking about that. Just having a 5/5 is kind of hard to deal with in a lot of situations on its own.
Yeah, just
Sometimes that's all Herald is, you know.
but
So
for
yeah.
for that, because I think you do want like a couple of these like power attack bonus creatures.
Hmm.
So I like kind of moving to that slot. Hyperspeed's like a really nice card as well. So it's kind of hard to find that balance, but I've generally liked like having a spread of like Hyperspeed and Maelstrom
Well,
and Sky Crusher.
something else that occurs to me with that is if I'm running more copies of the Herald, the Hyperspeed, the even the 5 drop, the Maelstrom, that might make me feel like I don't need to run as many copies of like the Finbar too, because I'll have more solid oath targets, you know?
Yeah, like I think with even just like Harold and Lyra, you're not like super low on oath stuff. Like I don't think Finbar's like a necessary thing because you have Oathsworn calls. Like I wouldn't feel super attached to them just because I mean it's not insane off oath. Like it's definitely good, right? It's relevant in a lot of spots, but um
We spent way more time discussing this than I intended to. I just wanted to talk about a few of the tech choices I changed around, but
yeah.
that's okay. The deck's not perfect. It's got a lot of ways to go, and that's the beautiful thing about
Well,
it.
I
You
mean,
know,
yeah,
it's
I think this list is good.
even
I think we're mostly just talking about ways to tune to tune it. And there's a lot more cards you can play than the ones that you have on the bottom here. I
oh
think,
sure, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of solid
mhm.
cards. I mean,
Yeah, I
yeah,
would Rusalka's. I think,
the Dragon Pool's insane. That's
yeah,
part of the reason the deck's insane.
yeah, for sure. I think,
You can
yeah,
make a pretty reasonable argument for like Chain Lash reasonably.
hmm
You can run all kinds of stuff.
yeah. There's lots of stuff to tune. I think a one of Reverberate has a lot of merit too. Like if you're looking for more of like a powerhouse card than Finbar for those mid range matchups, but whether it's like it might be too narrow at that point. So, but I think like Reverberate has a lot of merit. The Rusalkas have a lot of merit and a bunch of other stuff as well. I think, but overall, like I think your list was really solid. It was very similar. I think maybe like 5 cards off of mine from the previous event, but a lot of the changes were things that I would have done, like add back in the second awakened, um, which I had. I think,
Yes. Second Awakened was fantastic. I loved having
yeah, I
the
think you definitely
five
need it.
9 drop bombs. That was huge,
Yeah, I
for
think
sure.
last time I had like 2 Sky Crushers and a Maelstrom and one awakened, but it definitely should be 2 awakened, one of the power attack guys, and then um, what else? I think adding the second Korra was something I talked about after the previous event that I wanted to do, and I think like that was definitely a good choice. Um,
Yeah, that's something I might go back on. Realistically, that was like another thing
yeah, I mean
I would
Korra is not
consider like going
insanely
Logos
amazing.
instead there. But I still like having at least one. But I guess it depends on how many other people are playing dragons because it's not a good card against dragons.
Yeah, it's kind of medium. Definitely not not that good, but yeah, it kind of depends. So yeah, I think Korra is not. You don't need to play them along Oath. I think they work well with it in certain matchups, but it's not like a necessary card. Um, So yeah, definitely cuttable. It could just be not worth playing to be honest, but it has performed well in these last events for both of us. So I like getting the second one in there to try it, and I mean it definitely. I mean it was relevant. I think in our match for sure. And then what else was there? I think cutting the jump jets. I think definitely I can get on board with that. I had 2 in my list, but I think it's just probably too many of these kind of effects, like having the full 5. Like I think when you're playing oath call, you should definitely cut at least one. I think that's totally reasonable. I would definitely play like 2 if I don't have the oaths.
Oh
But
yeah, for sure. I think two without oath is definitely the right thing to do.
I don't know if I
Not
would cut it entirely. I
Yeah,
like
I'm a little torn on it the more I think about it. It's definitely like a card that it does do the work of like the fast attacker
mhm.
much of the time.
I could
Uh,
definitely see, like, I could see some metas where you would want to cut it entirely, but maybe those would be times where I would just like cut the oaths instead and play two jump jets. So it's kind of hard to say. But
yeah,
I
that's
like,
I think that's a totally reasonable direction to go.
but yeah.
Um,
So yeah, it's kind of iffy, but I like the 3-in-1 that you had. Um, Adding the third Kyo as well, I think is pretty good. I just a nice.
yeah,
It's not the
it's
best
it's a
card.
fire card, but and
Mhm.
it's a okay blast in a context neutral,
Yeah.
and it's a really good combo card. And it fits with Oath, it fits with Herald. Um,
Hmm.
my goodness, that turn one, that turn five play or whatever I did against
Against Louis, yeah. Yeah,
that just
you can do some sick stuff with Keo.
yeah,
I think because of like the sick stuff with Harold, it kind of gets a little overrated because of that like Harold synergy. But at the same time, I mean, it's definitely relevant. Like, there's a lot of spots where it's just very difficult to justify attacking dragons if they have a Herald out, and if you can't deal with it, then it makes it just really hard for them to even attack you. Like, I mean, it just doesn't come up that much because it's kind of awkward because a lot of the time when you have Herald out, like, you know what I mean? It's just either doing something or not. So Kyo doesn't change too much of that. But
sure, sure. I yeah, and it's definitely something that could get cut if I really needed something else.
yeah, but I
It's
think
like the probably the second core out. That would be like the other card that I would be like, I could see cutting this if I really wanted to get some other fancy tech in for
yeah, I
sure.
mean, from your like, I think it's just definitely a better choice. Basically, like just cutting the second jump jets for the third Kyo. I think just having that extra shield blast is probably the better choice. It's a little bit more well-rounded of a card. It's got text and a little bit more text in other matchups. But I mean, you could even consider just cutting the third Kyo and just adding another red dragon like that second hyper speed. Because I don't know how many if you'd really need like the full set of three shield blasts, but it's definitely in that kind of puzzle. I think maybe the extra threat would be a little better, but hard to say for sure. And then yeah, I guess that kind of rounds it out. One of the other cards that I had that you didn't. I mean, I was playing two laws in my list, and I had a Psychic Predator Rusalka as well. The Rusalka, I think
Yeah, and
maybe would have.
that would have put in some work this event too. I mean,
Yeah,
there were definitely some board states where having access to that effect would have been pretty good.
yeah, I think Rusalka probably would have been better than Strider, but I'm not 100%. That was kind of like the swap that was made. It was like from my list. I mean, the lists that I saw that you were testing weren't the
And
same as mine, so it wasn't that swap. But compared to my list, I would view
yeah,
like Strider being the card that can't comes in over Psychic Predator, and I
I
think I prefer it.
definitely had the regular Rusalka in there at one point in my process, and
Yeah.
I think Psychic Predator might be just better for dragons specifically. At least for the meta that we're dealing with right now, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so
Because
it would definitely be high up there on the list of things to sneak in there for
yeah, I
sure.
mean, yeah, Strider's nice as a cheap play, but both of them are kind of doing the same thing where they're just like blocking an Evo for a turn, is what it kind of felt like. Like, Strider would be a little bit better against like Darksider's deck where you just plop it out there and like it basically just slows them down till turn 4. So yeah, I mean, it's a good card, definitely, but I kind of like what Predator offers a little bit more, but hard to say. And then I don't think like cutting the second Keeper of Laws for this event didn't matter. I mean, I had two because I last time I definitely thought like maybe that like there was a good chance people would bring a lot more control-y stuff. And this time around, it felt like we kind of knew a little bit more of the metagame, and it definitely made sense that Keeper would be one of the cards you want to cut. But I think there's a lot of metagames where just having two or maybe even three would be preferable. But I definitely
Oh,
think,
for sure. Yeah. The law, it's,
I mean, this was a metagame where,
I almost liked it more for the untargetable aspect, honestly, than the spell discouragement.
yeah, I
But the
mean,
spell discouragement's cool too, because I mean, even the tempo decks I was dealing with, I had to worry about like the piercing judgments and the storm spark blast. So
yeah, but
it
I
would have
think,
been nice to have had it out, definitely.
I mean, you could have just, I think, cut the laws entirely from your deck, and it wouldn't really have changed much. I mean,
No,
the
that's
deck,
probably true,
like I don't
realistically.
think it was particularly good in either matchup you played. It's more of like an anti-control card, but which is basically what it is. It's also pretty good against mid range as well, but it's not like insane against like the creature heavy ones. But I mean, it's just another good card to play. Like it's in that suite of like Finbar, Logos, Reverberate, Iron Will Tree as these kind of like cards that I would choose to combat some of like the darkness stuff. But what mix of those you want to go with, I'm not too sure. But for this event, I think Keeper of Laws wasn't really necessary, and I think it was good that you cut one copy.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That's
Oh,
probably
yeah, you might have taught me into running the instead of the second laws, running a PPR instead. I could totally see
we'll see.
that.
It depends. Like dragons is really hard to like build super well because there's so many different things you could do with it. And but yeah, I mean this list definitely proven. I mean it took down both events, somewhat convincingly, I guess. But I mean we've talked a lot about dragons more than I think both of us thought. So
Well, there's plenty more to talk about, but yeah, it's probably more than enough for the purposes of the of your
yeah.
video.
So if anyone's still watching after all of that random, almost tangential discussion, that pretty much wraps up the event. So once again, congratulations to you, Andros, for the win. Nice to see you take it down, and thanks to everyone else for kind of following along with the event. And hopefully we can get another one up and going at some point and bring some more coverage of a follow up. Not sure if it would be open or maybe another format or something. We'll figure that all out. But stay tuned for potentially another tournament announcement down the line if you'd like to participate. So
Definitely. And next time I'll play Vang.
yes, good info, man. Thank you. So, but yeah, big thanks to you, Andros, for coming on and helping me with all of these tournament covered videos. It was very nice to have someone else to join the conversation. So thank you.
Been fun.
Yes, hopefully, hope I'm not wasting too much of your time with my rambling,
I
but
wasn't going to do anything tonight anyway. It's fine.
okay. So thanks to everyone else for watching the videos, and we'll see you next time. Bye.